Are you fed up with politics and especially the presidential campaign? On How Do We Fix It, we're covering the people, projects, and ideas of Braver Angels, a nationwide campaign, a coalition of liberals and conservatives who are working to restore hope and cooperation to our politics. Imagine that. In this episode, we speak to our second pair of red-blue citizens who will be working together, right alongside each other, at a polling site on Election Day. It's all part of a remarkable Election Day initiative. Our guests are Elizabeth Dahl and Don Goldberg.
The other is not necessarily the enemy. They just happen to be another side. And maybe if you consider that other side, you can, in my case, be more literally liberal, accepting all points of view.
And like Dawn, I hope that they recognize people can be friends, people can talk about politics with each other, disagree about politics with each other, and still be in relationship with each other.
It's about being a good neighbor.
Yeah, being a good neighbor, and also being a good citizen.
Our show is about fixes.
Yeah, how to make the world a better place.
How do we fix it?
How do we fix it?
This episode is a reminder that America's voting system differs across the country from one state to the other. Washington state votes by mail. People mail in their ballots, put them in drop boxes, or hand in their ballots to the local county elections department. We're going to find out more about that with two guests.
My name is Elizabeth Dahl, and I lean red politically.
And my name is Don Goldberg, and I lean blue politically.
Let's hear from both of them. Don is a writer and political and social satirist who now helps transcribe the podcast A Braver Way. Elizabeth is director of Braver Politics at Braver Angels. She's been a volunteer and a consultant for political campaigns in the Pacific Northwest over a number of years. Our conversation was about the Election Day Initiative, the brainchild of Gabby Timmis at Braver Angels. I asked Elizabeth first why she's involved with the initiative, as well as the thinking behind it.
The thinking behind it was just, it was a great idea that Gabby had that I thought sounded fantastic. A really neat way to engage people that you wouldn't otherwise come into contact with. And for them to see that there are actually people out there who have friendships across the divide and can even talk about politics and be involved in politics and still be on different sides of it. Trying to figure out exactly how to make that work in Washington State was a little bit trickier, but I wanted to do it as soon as Gabby came up with the idea.
Gabby is Gabby Timmis, right? For our listeners.
Yes.
Yeah. Gabby Timmis is, I think, runs publicity and communications for Braver Angels.
Yes. She's our marketing genius.
Don, how would you answer that question about why you're involved in the Election Day Initiative?
I would use exactly the same words that Elizabeth used. I've been in my little blue bubble, especially in Seattle, Washington, and I didn't think it was fair to myself. So I wanted to reach out. The first thing I did was I went to the Braver Angels convention and saw as many people with red lanyards as I could. Was that the ferry boat?
Yeah, apologies.
That was the ferry boat. How exciting. Yeah. We should explain that Elizabeth's on Bainbridge Island, and they rely on ferry boats almost as much as we rely on cars here in Connecticut.
Yes, and I live across the street from the ferry, so that was, believe it or not, with all of my windows closed, that is still how loud the ferry horn is.
Okay, Don, do carry on.
Okay, so I went to the convention and wanted to talk to as many people with red lanyards and their name tags as I could to find common ground, which I did. And then afterward wanted to follow up We've never met in person, Elizabeth and I, but we on a Zoom call we did. We're talking about to what to do on election day, and I immediately said, "Yeah, I'm in," as well as Elizabeth did, and then we just decided on a place where we would get the most traffic and maybe the most media.
Now, most people, most of the red-blue pairs for Braver Angels are outside good old-fashioned traditional polling places where people come and trickle in during the day and cast their votes. But things are a little bit different in Washington state.
So we have drop boxes in Washington state. We are a mandatory absentee vote state. There are no polling places. We don't pull a lever to choose our candidate. We have paper ballots that are mailed to every registered voter about 3.5 weeks before the election. And then people can drop them in a drop box or they can send them through the mail. They don't even need a stamp. As long as they are postmarked by election night, you are good to go and all those ballots will be counted. So what often happens is that people don't bother to turn in their ballots until election day. I've noticed that there's usually a steady stream of cars approaching drop boxes and turning in ballots on election day. And prior to that, it's just really a slow trickle, one car here, one car there throughout the day.
So, Don, are you going to be sitting in deck chairs next to the drop box in Renton, Washington? Or how's this going to work?
I'll bring a folding chair simply because I'm 76 and I have sciatica. But but otherwise, no, we want to be sitting together. I had this crazy idea that we have either one of us has a red lollipops and the other has, cherry and grape, red and blue, or maybe Kool-Aid, and convince people that it's really okay to take the other person's Kool-Aid because they can be sweet as well. But we'll be next.
I love that. Actually, that's a great idea.
So you're hoping that people will get out of their cars and say hello, or how will that work?
I'm hoping that that's the case. And if we're at election headquarters, they may actually park because they may have to go and get their signatures validated. So they'll have to go inside. And then on their way in, perhaps we'll get a chance to speak with them.
So in Washington state, people sign their mail-in ballots, but in some cases, the signature might not match what's on the state's files.
When the processing center receives people's ballots in the mail, you have to sign the outside of the envelope that the ballot is in. And that signature is the first thing that gets scanned before your ballot is separated from the envelope. And if the signature doesn't match what's on a voter registration for the barcode that's on the envelope that's associated to that person, then you get a postcard from the county and you get a phone call. And if you put your email address down, you get an email with a QR code.
So voters can fix or validate their signatures.
A number of years ago, either I wasn't sure about my signature because I kind of scribble it when I, do the cursive. And I wanted to make sure that my vote counted. So I actually went down earlier to election headquarters and said, could I see the signatures that you have on file so that I can make sure that mine matches it? And I gave them the information.
So what do you think is going to be achieved by this red-blue pairing, not only where you are in Washington state, but also across the country by teams of red-blue Braver Angels volunteers?
I hope that it will allow people not to demonize the other person, to see that they're human beings, that it's possible to have disagreements without leading to a fight. Call it sophisticuffs.
Sophisticuffs? What do you mean?
Civil conversation, rather than actually, having to fight one another, and sometimes literally, to be able to use some kind of sophistication, some kind of civil discourse and come to a happy disagreement. Just to know that the other is not necessarily the enemy. They just happen to be another side. And maybe if you consider that other side, you can, in my case, be more literally liberal, accepting all points of view. And to know that generally we want the same things. How we want to achieve them and the speed at which we want to achieve them may differ. Your mileage may differ.
I would say I hope that more people discover Braver Angels, become aware of Braver Angels, and check it out, join their local alliance. And like Dawn, I hope that they recognize people can be friends, people can talk about politics with each other, disagree about politics with each other, and still be in relationship with each other, still be friends, still appreciate each other, and see value in each other's ideas and different approaches, even if you might fight really hard against some of them.
It's about being a good neighbor.
Yeah, being a good neighbor, and also being a good citizen. I think that often people in echo chambers think that they are influencing politics by screaming at people who mostly agree with them, and by cutting people out of their lives who disagree with them, as though doing so will somehow coerce that person into greater agreement or back into their lives or into changing how they vote on something. And that's just not what usually happens. What usually happens is, in fact, that you push people further away from your perspective and make people less likely to give anything that you say any credence. And you become so much less likely to influence people who disagree with you if you refuse to talk to them or hang out with them.
It's How Do We Fix It? I'm Richard Davies, and we're hearing from Elizabeth Dahl, a conservative who lives on very liberal Bainbridge Island, not far from Seattle, and Don Goldberg, a liberal who lives in Seattle itself. They will be together on Election Day as part of the Braver Angels Election Day initiative. You can find out more about it at the braverangels.org website, and there are also a whole bunch of local in-person and online events going on across the country in the coming days and weeks. You can find an event if you go to the Find an Event prompt on page 1 of the Braver Angels website. You may well find something of interest near you. Now back to our interview with Elizabeth and Don. What does this Trustworthy Elections Initiative say about the spirit of Braver Angels?
People across very substantial difference from each other can actually find common ground on tools, on policies that would make them feel as though our election outcomes can be more trusted. Whether it's a progressive who's concerned about voter suppression or whether it's a conservative who's concerned about election fraud, it's hearing each other's concerns and underlying values that builds trust across that line of extraordinary disagreement that would usually have people avoid each other and believe the worst about each other. And when they're able to build that trust with each other, then they can think about this as them working together instead of thinking of each other as the cause of the problem.
Don and Elizabeth, do you have stories from your own lives that led you to be motivated to be part of a red-blue pair on Election Day?
I have blue friends that won't get off the dime. And it's true when you see some of the ridiculous folly that comes across your TV screen, and then you immediately want to say, well, these people that are saying ridiculous talking points represent a larger swath of what is a conservative group. And I'm trying to say, hey, wait a minute, most people are not like this. They just happen to catch the eye of the whatever medium is focused on them. So I want to go personally and maybe have a picture and say, I get along with these folks. I'd like to be more of a liberal than I've been. Therefore, look at other points of view. And that in turn has led me from one point to another to want to do this.
Elizabeth, do you have a personal story you want to share?
I am trying to figure out where to even begin. I could say back in the day, what led me to be concerned about polarization is working on campaigns and seeing people absolutely destroy their relationships with each other over politics. And I grew up in sort of a rural area. And so that really worried me because I became concerned that if we weren't talking to each other and we couldn't understand each other because of politics, then we definitely wouldn't be able to recognize each other's needs or help each other in a crisis. And in rural places, it's not the government that you rely on for help in a crisis, it's your neighbors. It's the other people who live in the community with you. And so I started worrying a lot about what was at the underlying what was the root cause of that and what could I do to impact it. And that led me to organize dinners between Republican and Democratic women on Bainbridge Island, where I live. That led me eventually to find Braver Angels. It led me to try to impact polarization on the political side. It's really led me to right where I am at the head of the Braver Politics program. Now I live on a very blue island. I did not grow up here. I grew up about an hour south. People here have a lot of stereotypes about red-leaning people. And I'm always wanting to undo those so that conservatives aren't afraid to exist here, so that Republicans aren't afraid to say what they believe to their friends. And that's a thing that's been true here for decades. There is very, very little openness to different perspectives on politics that are particularly to the right of center. And it's been an enormous problem for Republicans and for conservatives who want to live here, who want to be part of a community, and who want to be honest about who they are and what they believe. Those are the types of things that really drive me. So it's not just one story. It's not just one personal experience, though I have many that I could speak to. It's a whole laundry list of things and my whole life experience over time.
How are both of you feeling about this election? Are you excited? Are you nervous? Do you have anxiety?
I have no anxiety about the election at all. I really do believe in the government and the institutions and that things will be counted fairly. If I have any anxiety, it would be post-election. If the counting happens that the Democrats win, will the top of the ticket, will Trump actually concede? And if he doesn't, what will happen to the people who were more on the more violent side and how will they respond? But the election itself, I know I have faith in it.
You heard me say that my background is politics. So I almost never truly dread an election. It's something of a holiday for me. I'm always excited to see the outcomes as ballots are counted. Usually I'm on pins and needles waiting for the results to be finalized and waiting for the bulk of votes to be counted in Washington state, because my piece that I'm the most interested in is being a data nerd and diving into, okay, now that we know what happened, why did it happen?
You are definitely a political junkie.
Yes. So I I don't have a ton of fear, to be honest. I do not subscribe to the idea that every election is the most important election of our lifetimes. I do not believe that this election could be the last election we'll ever have. We'll survive 4 years, whatever happens, and we'll have another election in 2028.
I kind of disagree. I think it is the most important election of my lifetime. I'm 76, and I've been through the 60s, and I just seen the assassinations, the various things, the struggles, the good things that the Republicans have done, the EPA under Nixon and tearing down the wall under Reagan, and but it just seems that everything is different. The media is different. There's more media. It's not just 3 channels of people subscribing to it, and everybody has a microphone. You can take what you're saying, and it goes out around the world. So based on that and perceptions, it does bother me.
Don and Elizabeth, thanks very much for joining us on How Do We Fix It?
Thank you for
I do
having
appreciate
us.
it. Thank you.
And best of luck to you on Election Day. Hope the initiative is a big success.
We're bringing our lollipops. Thanks.
Yes.
Don Goldberg leans blue, Elizabeth Dahl leans red. Both are committed members of Braver Angels, and together they're one of the red-blue teams across the country who will be out in public together as America votes on Election Day. This show was put together with the help of the good people at A Braver Way, a Braver Angels podcast about how Americans of all viewpoints can disagree about politics without losing heart. Thanks to their team, David Albright, Jessica Jones, and show host Mani Guzman. We're How Do We Fix It? Our producer and sound designer is Miranda Schaefer. Find all our shows at howdowefixit.me. I'm Richard Davies. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,